This is Detroit's Morning Answer with John Anthony on FM 92.7 and AM 1400. The Answer.
Good morning, Detroit. Detroit's Morning Answer with John Anthony. If you missed that first hour, head over to theanswerdetroit.com. That's theanswerdetroit.com. Download the podcast. You can listen to the show no matter where you are. I really took what Eric Trump was saying about, this lawfare and what his father had to do. Our next guest understands this quite well. This is his maiden voyage on Detroit's Morning Answer, although he has been on Black and Right twice now. And when I first came out to do the Detroit Morning Answer show, my first show was Black and Right at the Oakland County Republican headquarters, 2 years ago now. And then I had him on this year at the same event with the car cruise. I really do believe there's a shift happening in Michigan. And here's the reason why. Voters are looking for someone who does not treat that attorney general office like a political weapon, but as the final guardrail for what? Justice. They want someone who understands the law, respects the Constitution, and believes that public safety cannot, I repeat, cannot survive when prosecutors chase headlines instead of criminals. Kijewski. I'm always butchering his name. He knows it. I was just with him in Livonia and butchered his name too. Kevin Kijewski is stepping into that moment with a message that feels very clear. He wants to end lawfare. He wants to restore election integrity, support law enforcement, and bring real prosecution to violent crime and government fraud. He has lived these battles up close. He has represented clients in some of the most politically charged cases in recent memory. Kevin says Michigan does not need an activist. It needs an attorney general. Today, we find out what that means in practice. Kevin, welcome to Detroit's Morning Answer.
Thanks for having me, John. Great to talk to you again. How are you?
We always have a good time when we're together, so I'm doing well. But, Kevin, what was that moment when you realized that the Michigan's Attorney General office had crossed a line from prosecutor to political actor, and that it was time for you to challenge that culture?
Yeah, so as your listeners probably know, I represented one of the 16 alternate electors that were charged with sham charges by the Attorney General that were standing up to have their rights heard in the 2020 election. When I kind of took the case, I had a suspicion that there was a problem. But then inevitably at the early part of the case, Dana Nessel actually went on a liberal chat of some sort on Zoom, and she told everyone why she wanted to pursue this case, because she thought that this was something that could never happen again. She wanted to charge him in Ingham County because it was a very Democratic county, and she said that they didn't have even the requisite criminal intent, yet alone she wanted to charge them anyway. Wow. At that particular moment, when I heard about that and I read it, I knew for sure my suspicions were true. So I had a suspicion before. It was confirmed early on. And about 2.5 years later, going to September 9th, I got the charges dismissed. And I'm glad that Cliff and the other electors were actually exonerated, essentially, to just say that, because this was political lawfare, plain and simple. If you are a prosecutor, you're supposed to bring prosecutions based on evidence, not based on any type of nonsensical political views you may have.
Yeah, Kevin, how much were the taxpayers on the hook for this prosecution?
You know, that is a question that the legislature is trying to find out right now because they have different document requests in. Dana Nessel is supposed to actually go in front of the House Weaponization Committee, the same committee that I testified not that long ago before. And they're going to be asking those questions because right now we don't know. But let's just put it this way. She actually increased the staffing in her office from 2018 to present by about 50%. Wow. And her budget went up from about $104 million to about $130-ish million just recently. And I can tell you what's going on. We don't know exactly how much of that was being used for this persecution and this prosecution, but I can tell you definitely she has sued Donald Trump 35 times.
Wow.
She has gone after folks during COVID. So most of this additional, quote unquote, staffing has been used to actually satisfy her political agenda, not for the pursuit of justice.
Now, Kevin, let's talk about Michigan and an election integrity, because all eyes are on Michigan now. These Michigan elections are now viewed through what I call this national lens. What do you believe are the real vulnerabilities in our current system, and how would the Attorney General office address them without creating these barriers for voters?
Absolutely. So if I take a look at the last election that we had 15 individuals that were not U.S. citizens that voted. But the only reason we know that is because simply Jocelyn Benson, the Secretary of State, said that to a reporter who later reprinted it. But we don't know exactly who they are, where they came from, the circumstances by which the Secretary of State identified these people. Did they do like a big audit, a forensic review? Did they just sort of do a cursory review? We have no idea. So I think the biggest vulnerability that we have is simply individuals perhaps not even being U.S. citizens voting. Because when people actually get registered, it's automatic. And you have to actually, I kid you not, you can't make this stuff up. You have to opt out. So if you're not a U.S. citizen, you're supposed to inform them. Wow. Otherwise, you can actually be on the voter rolls. And then I spoke with lots of reporters and lots of other individuals. I won't get way into the particulars. But these folks, for the most part, these registrants, there are a whole bunch of them at particular homes or businesses. There's one place in Detroit, and won't go down that rabbit hole, but it's like 20 or 30 people registered at a coffee shop, and it doesn't make any sense.
But those are mail-in ballots, Kevin. Those are mail-in ballots. Now, does everybody get a mail-in ballot here in Michigan?
You would actually have to elect to get permanent, no-excuse absentee voting. Wow. And that does happen here where people vote and actually sort of opt in to do that. But I don't necessarily like the way that it's done. Now, it's done because of a constitutional amendment. I understand that. The AG is not here to get rid of particular provisions of the Constitution. But what the AG can do is to make sure that the law is being obeyed. So no more fraudulent registrations, no more problems when it comes to people that are not U.S. citizens voting our elections. And just a quick plug, that's why everyone should be signing this particular petition circulating around to get U.S. citizen-only voting on the ballot. That is so key. That becomes part of our Constitution. We're going to have to do a forensic audit to make sure that all the individuals on the voter rolls are U.S. citizens, and that gives additional tools for the AG and the Secretary of State to do their jobs well.
You know, Kevin, when I'm in Michigan, I every time I see a police officer, you know, I talk to them and see how the morale is. And I'm going to tell you, Michigan police officers, the ones at least I've talked to, they feel abandoned by their political leaders. What does meaningful support look like from an attorney general, and how would you deliver it?
Well, when it comes to our wonderful law enforcement, our men and women in blue, they need to be supported. What we've had is simply, essentially, the AG's office, who's responsible for delivering professional development and continuous education and all these other type of trainings to local prosecutors, making them very wary about how to use force. Now, I don't think that force should just be used like deadly force right away. Of course not. No one thinks that. Yeah. But we have folks that, frankly, get hurt, get injured because they have to try to, quote unquote, de-escalate the situation when there's clearly a clear and present threat in front of them. So what I would be doing as Attorney General is to make sure that we just have the law followed. It's that simple. If you have a clear and present threat to either the officer or individuals around, you don't have to necessarily worry about trying to perhaps use a talk strategy with them right away when someone's getting hurt. Use the appropriate amount of force, and I'm going to back them up when they do.
You know, Kevin, I've seen, as you know, ICE has been throughout many cities, and I believe there was an incident where they had to fire into a vehicle. I want to say it was either Chicago or maybe L.A. somewhere, where they had to fire into a vehicle that was coming upon them. Now, in Illinois, that's illegal. An officer can't. A vehicle is not considered a weapon in Illinois. What does Michigan do right now as it relates to an officer? If there's a vehicle coming and the officer he has to shoot and, to stop the threat. Is that illegal here in Michigan?
So I want to just say, if we follow the law, it is okay to defend yourself and others, because a projectile, which could actually even be a vehicle, you can stop the individual if they're acting unlawfully. However, this is why I kind of qualify the answer. Unfortunately, it depends upon the prosecutor.
There it is.
You could have a county prosecutor that says, well, I interpret the law this way or that way.
Yeah.
Not that when it comes to the attorney general, we control all the county prosecutors. That's absolutely not the case. But we provide the training. And actually, believe it or not, the attorney general has, as a matter of right, the ability to intervene in any case, any criminal case, any civil case. So if we see abuses happening, we will get involved. So we're going to make sure everyone's going to be reading from the same sheet of music, and everyone is going to be following Michigan law the way it's supposed to be followed.
Kevin, when we were in Livonia, you were telling me about a special power also that the attorneys general have. Do you recall what you were saying, that you have the power that this current attorney general has not taken use of? Do you remember that conversation that you were telling the voters of Livonia?
Yeah, I think so. And was it perhaps the power or the ability to issue attorney general opinions?
There it is. Yes, I thought that was powerful. Can you lay that out to the listening audience?
Sure. So attorney general opinions is when the attorney general's office says a particular provision of the Constitution or statute, what it means. And that is binding upon everyone, even including the governor, going on down. And the only way that that particular attorney general opinion would be invalidated is, for example, if the Michigan Supreme Court heard a case and did something different. But these attorney general opinions are so powerful that they are respected by the courts. I'll give you a quick example.
Yeah.
You could take a look at 2007. I just was with him the other day, former Attorney General Mike Cox, and he's running for governor now. He said in an AG opinion, look, guys, you cannot issue driver's licenses, whether for a regular individual or CDL, to someone in this country that is here illegally. But what did we see just, frankly, last week? ICE actually arrested a guy that had a CDL from Michigan, and he was an illegal alien.
Wow.
And it's just like, why are people ignoring the law? But the bottom line is, from 2007 up to present and going into the future, it is essentially the quote-unquote law of the land through the attorney general opinion. You can't do that. And there are a whole bunch of attorney general opinions I would issue, and I can talk about that now or later or whenever you want.
Well, one of the opinions that I think should be looked at is if Michigan tries or decides to want to become a sanctuary city, would that be something that you would journey into and give an opinion about that as relates? And because with this power, there's a lot of power in this seat, and having somebody like you in there who understands these things, especially having somebody to lean on like Mike Cox to say, because that guy is one of, just talking to him, man, I feel so small because he's really that smart. But would you look into the sanctuary city, a state status, and say, nah, we cannot do this?
Yeah, so when it comes to attorney general opinions, for the most part, it is just about interpreting the law. But I'm going to tell you what, I think that the law in Michigan is crystal clear. You cannot try to interfere. You cannot try to impede. You can't try to do anything to stop federal law enforcement from doing their job. So if we have a city, for example, like the city of East Lansing, where Michigan State is located, the university that is, we're going to make sure that they're not going to get in the way of federal law enforcement. And if they do, that's where the Attorney General's office needs to take action. I actually kind of think that the law is very clear right now. We just have an issue of enforcement. And if people are not actually enforcing the law as they're supposed to do, or more so, if they're getting in the way of the law and impeding the law, then we need an attorney general to intervene, and that's exactly what I would do right away from day one.
Well, our Michigan State Senator, I want to get your take on what she has to say about no troops.
I want to talk about a security issue, and that is the continued deployment of both federal law enforcement and uniformed military in American streets. The president has tried to send about 7,000 uniformed military into our streets. Law enforcement are in major cities, as you know, like Chicago and Portland. And the president has been talking about his willingness to invoke something called the Insurrection Act that would allow uniformed military to act in law enforcement roles, something that's very different in American history. That means raids, arrest, detention, something that, again, to me, very much contravenes the spirit our founding fathers put in place on the role of the military in our cities. I want to talk about some of the risks of having federal law enforcement and uniformed military on the ground in our streets, particularly given most of them are not trained or trained well on basic police techniques.
False.
I'm very worried that we're going to have a violent incident, that law enforcement, uniformed military are going to overreact when communities start pushing, to see what's going on with one of their loved ones, and you could have violent incidents. We've already seen law enforcement drawing their weapons, hitting cars on the highway, just behavior that gives me pause and makes me concerned that we're going to see violence on the streets of our cities. In response to this very unusual move of putting law enforcement and uniformed military in the streets of our cities against the will of those states, I have put out a bill called the No Troops in Our Streets Act. And it basically says that, look, if the president is putting uniformed military out in the streets of our cities against the will of that state, Congress can vote to terminate that deployment.
Kevin, what say you?
Well, when it comes to the whole idea about deploying either the National Guard or active duty, and I'm not going to get nerdy, I promise. I'm going to say one Latin phrase. It's posse comitatus.
Yes.
Posse comitatus basically is the general rule after the Civil War, after Reconstruction. You cannot deploy active duty troops in order to police folks. However, there are exceptions to this. And again, it was noted, for example, the Insurrection Act, which dates all the way back to the founding of this country in the 18th century in the late 1700s. That is something that is rarely used, but can be used. But that is just something that more likely than not, the president is not going to have to use.
Right.
So if you take a look, for example, at what happened in L.A. and actually what folks are trying to do in Chicago, it is not to try to take over the whole city. It's just to provide protection so that ICE and the Department of Homeland Security can do their jobs. So what this particular individual is suggesting is nonsense and probably is not something that would even be valid anyway if it would be litigated later on. The last thing I'll leave you with regarding this is what the courts have said. And the courts have said that when it comes to trying to declare a state of insurrection or if there is a rebellion, that's something that, frankly, that only the president can make that determination. So a legislator cannot usurp that particular power and sort of take it away from the president. It's a separation of powers issue, which I don't think ultimately would be successful here if this would actually be passed by the Senate or whatever else.
Right. Kevin, I think I'm going to have you on in a couple of more weeks because, the state house, Michigan House, they found a lot of fraud inside of a lot of state agencies, and I'd love to get your take on that. So I'm going to tell Riley to get you back on in a couple of more weeks. But I want to give you an opportunity. We got about a minute and 15 seconds left. I want to give you a full minute to speak to the voters of Michigan why they should elect you as the next Attorney General for the great state of Michigan.
Sure. So if you're taking a look at trying to restore safety and actually getting back to regular law enforcement, if you're looking at restoring your constitutional rights, which means constitutional carry, which means parental rights, which means actually getting fair representation from your legislators and making sure that the governor is going to do her job. I'm talking about the 35th Senate District. Or if you're taking a look at election integrity to make sure that only legal votes will count and matter, then I'm your guy. And I'm asking for all the different delegates out there in Michigan to actually support me. March 28th, we're going to have the endorsement convention. And then going into November, we're going to make this state absolutely ruby red again. If people want to know more about me or find out more, You can find me on X, or you can go to Kevin4MI. It's KEVINFORMI.com. And looking forward to taking the state back from top to bottom when it comes to our ticket.
Kevin Kijewski, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure having a discussion with you because you're so clear on where you stand, and I love people that are running for office that do that. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure. Have a great day.
All right, that's Kevin Kijewski running for Attorney General for the great state of Michigan. We'll be right back.